Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemons, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us for The Future of Missile Defense, where we'll be exploring why the Pentagon and Congress are prioritizing a layered missile defense strategy now. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Raytheon Missiles and Defense, for its support of today's event. In President Biden's first speech to Congress, he named North Korea and Iran's nuclear programs as serious threats to American security and the security of the world. As we look at both present and emerging concerns, what areas of the U.S. threat landscape our missile defense leaders are prioritizing and why? What advanced capabilities will the Pentagon deploy to mitigate risk in the near and long terms? And what are the primary challenges facing American missile defense strategy? We're going to be putting these questions and more in front of our fantastic lineup of speakers. But first, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill Defense. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. And with any live stream, they say if it all goes down, just push refresh and it will come right back up. I am one still waiting to see that happen, but it'll happen for you. My first guest is Congressman Jim Cooper from Tennessee. He's the chair of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over policy related to missile defense, nuclear weapons, strategic deterrence, and more. Congressman Cooper, a long time ago, about 30, 40 years ago, I read a book called Wizards of Armageddon, and it was about these early guys at Rand Corporation that were thinking through all the dimensions of what strategic deterrence and mutual assured destruction and what kinds of layers of defense we needed to have. And that was when, I guess, the Cold War was at its ripest. We're no longer in that same situation today, and I won't call you a wizard of Armageddon, maybe a wizard of space or a wizard of peace. But what are the key features that you think are really important, particularly with regards to missile defense?
Well, Steve, I'm glad to be with you. These are increasingly important topics. Even though we've been thinking about missile defense and preparing for 40 years, now with rogue states, and also with the threat of accidental launch from another country, we need to be prepared. And thank goodness our military is prepared. We have a layered defense now that should give us greater assurance that we are safe from any possible mistaken attack.
Do you think that when you're out there, when I just mentioned Iran and North Korea, are those the two sources that you worry about most in your profile? And I guess that's a sloppy way of me asking you, do you worry about non-state actors in the missile defense arena?
Well, we do worry about the rogue states the most. It's pretty hard for a terrorist organization to get the capability you need to launch any sort of missile. Now, there's some small rockets, such as, for example, Israel's been facing. But to hit the continental United States, it takes quite some doing. There's also a threat of accidental launch from one of the major states that have missiles galore. And we need to keep in mind the threat that accidents pose to our country.
Congressman Cooper, where are you right now in Russia? And I raise this because just this week, there were 65 national security leaders who have sent a letter to President Biden and said, in your discussions about the New START treaty and about arms control negotiations, particularly with the Russians, we ought to put missile defense on the table. Does that make sense from your perspective?
It's curious about missile defense. This is one of the few areas of American military capability that our peer rivals have exaggerated. They seem actually terrified of it and think that our capabilities are actually much greater than they are. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. Perhaps it's the modest name of the so-called Standard Missile, the key to the Aegis defense platform. Perhaps it's other things, but certainly the Russians and the Chinese have been extremely alarmed about our missile defense capabilities. They're particularly worried that somehow it might give us a first strike capability, which I really don't know anyone in America is interested in. But it's really a touchy subject for Russia and for China.
Well, I remember, I think it was about 2 years ago now, you may remember that video that Vladimir Putin did, and it had, all of this graphics and a super hypersonic missile coming in saying we can take on anybody, we're technologically ahead and there's nothing that can stop us. And, it seemed like a gimmicky video at the time, but I know sometimes when leaders come out and brag, there could be some truth behind that. Are we, from your estimation, prepared for whatever the Russians have developed or developing by way of hypersonic missiles that could be used in such an attack?
Well, hypersonics are a threat, and we're developing our own capability, but other nations are rushing fast ahead. And it's not just hypersonic threats that Russia and China are throwing at us. the Putin press conference that you mentioned of 2 years ago was like a freak show of exotic and really unthinkable weapons that could,
it was really weird.
Or hit us from the South Pole, or just,
yeah.
It was really the ultimate in saber rattling. But, Russia is a declining nation. They have huge internal problems. Putin is making the best of a bad situation. But by over-investing in his nuclear and missile areas, pretty soon he won't even have the demographics to field a serious army the way their population is declining. China is the more serious threat, and they're beefing up their nuclear capability dramatically, as well as their hypersonic capability. So we need the ability to detect these threats and to protect America from them.
Where do you think we are right now with regards to North Korea? We went through kind of a nuclear dance with North Korea over the last few years with President Trump. We've come in. I can't tell which direction per se the Biden administration is going yet, but I've been watching North Korea for decades now, and I've never seen anything really make an impact on its very, very strong intentions to develop nuclear weapons, almost as negotiating chips to survive. But I'm wondering, from a military and a strategic perspective, and also right on the edge with our ally Japan, also looking at, instabilities with Taiwan that General Mark Milley and others have laid out as being of great concern with regards to China's intentions. That area just looks like it's full of fault lines. And I'm wondering, from a strategic and military perspective, there's one thing about defending the United States. There's nothing about missile defense and allies, and wondering how that fits in.
You raised some key issues there, and these are primarily Pacific and PACOM issues. Former President Trump's overtures to Kim Jong-un in North Korea were bizarre. President Trump was the only world leader, including the Chinese, to ever even meet with Kim Jong-un. And his attempted love affair did not pay off at all. All Kim Jong-un has done is proceed with his missile and nuclear capabilities. He also raised the issue of extended deterrence. That's our relationship with our allies, whom we want to be using our nuclear umbrella of protection. We do not want them to proliferate nuclear technologies. And in large part, that has worked. But as the China threat grows, we need to hold China accountable to make them contain Kim Jong-un in North Korea. But we also need to protect our allies against Chinese threats, because in the South China Sea and other areas on the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, they're getting increasingly aggressive, and that should worry us all.
Mr. Chairman, about 45 years ago, I'm trying to think back, it's longer than I thought, when I did read Fred Kaplan's book, Wizards of Armageddon, and I was working as a young kid at Rand Corporation at that time, we had just kind of begun to think very, very non-seriously, I would say, about space. And it seems to me that is one of the major changes between the strategic terrain then and now. And many people look at you as the real founder, the father of the Space Corps, of Space Forces, and thinking through this. And I'd love you to share with our listeners what dimensions of space and security ought to be on our radar screen, so to speak.
Well, first, I'm glad you mentioned Fred Kaplan. It's not just his old book, The Wizards of Armageddon. It's his new book, The Bomb, which everybody should read if they want a concise history of what's been going on. And groups like RAND have played a key role, and I'm proud of your service there. As regards to space, we are so dependent on space for everything we do in our daily lives. We really have no idea. It's not just our TV and internet, it's our ATMs, our banking, all forms of internet communication. Without the space capabilities that our satellites give us, we would be crippled. And increasingly, rival nations are looking at ways of taking out our satellites. Hitherto, the space assets we had been unprotected, and we didn't fear for them at all. But now other nations are spending many billions of dollars to try to develop capabilities to destroy our satellites in that unfriendly domain. So we've really got to be careful here as space becomes a contested environment. And it's not me, the founder of Space Force, Mike Rogers and I, the congressman from Alabama. We're working very hard together in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that our Pentagon recognize the need to bolster our space capabilities. Unfortunately, our friends in the Air Force had given space a lower priority than it deserved. So Space Force had to grow into its own separate service. It's the first time that's happened since World War II, to to have the creation of a brand new service. And I'm thankful for that. It's still fledgling. It's getting on its feet. But it's the guardians, as they're called, those who serve in the Space Force, will be key to America's and the world's future.
Mr. Chairman, I know that talking money is always complicated, but sometimes budgets is where things get real. I know there's been discussion not only just of the Space Forces and this new arena of the, this new separate force of the armed services, but also things like the Next Generation Interceptor and beginning to replace some of the elements of the layered missile defense system that we have. And I guess my question is, as you look into, you'll know better than I do, does the Biden budget put the right thumbs on the right resources for NGI, for Space Forces?
Overall, the Biden defense budget is very strong. It continues America's commitment to defend itself. And remember, this is the only part of the federal budget that we don't get to set. It's essentially set by our rivals around the world. And we have to be able to meet and beat anything that they throw at us. And that includes missiles. So whether you're looking at GBIs, our major missiles to defend against rogue attack, or our layered defense, which is also helpful, or many, many other aspects of our defense budget, I think the Biden budget is keeping faith with the American people and with our service members to keep America strong, to keep America number one, and really by far number one, because the whole free world depends on us, and we have to show leadership in this area. And as a percent of overall federal spending, our defense budget is actually a pretty small part. It looks large if you exclude many other parts of the budget, but in general, we're keeping on track to keep America strong.
Let me ask you a out of left field question, because I think, I don't think it would be wrong of Americans who care about this issue to wonder and worry about the state of our command and control when it came to our strategic forces. A few years ago, I interviewed General John Hyten, I think it's John Hyten, who was then head of the Strategic Air Command, and he would have been the last human being that President Trump would have spoken to before the launch of a nuclear weapon. And I asked General Hyten, I said, had you thought about what you're going to talk about with the president before taking that order? And without any prompting from me, he said to our audience, I will not execute an illegal order. And it made global headlines when he said that. But it also prompted the question of, wow, how sound, how predictable, how secure is our command and control? Because sometimes there are accidents, sometimes there are moments where you wonder about the stability of leadership, whether back then or in the future. And I'm just wondering, this also comes into your domain of looking at it. We've had reforms on defense decision-making in the past. Do you think we need any new reforms when it comes to those kinds of high-level decisions in our strategic capabilities?
We look at this area continuously, and everybody knows from TV movies that, the president always has the nuclear football near him. And we need to worry about presidential judgment. We also need to worry whether the football works and whether it's in fact connected on a timely basis to our military assets. And I think now with President Biden, we should have little concern. He's the most experienced president we've had probably in American history. He's solid as a rock, and the football does work. Now the football needs to be continually upgraded. We've got to make sure that it can't be jammed or spoofed or in any way taken offline. And I do think that our military, as exemplified by General Hyten and now by Admiral Richard, these are superb, highly trained professionals. They do what the Constitution requires, and that's to maintain civilian leadership of our military. And we need to always work on smarter and wiser civilian leadership to make sure that the Pentagon is led in an appropriate fashion by the current wonderful Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, and by civilian leaders in Congress who always guide the nation in the right path. But governance is a continuing struggle. We've survived well for almost 250 years now. We need to work on making sure the next 250 years are as successful.
Jim, let me just ask you one final question. I know we're running out of time, but I love this conversation. I haven't done it in a long time. But I used to work for Senator Jeff Bingaman, so we had 2 nuclear weapons laboratories in the state of New Mexico, and I used to hang out with the scientists that were really designing, the next generation systems in a lot of our strategic arsenal, if you will, and plutonium management and on. But I'm also very aware of friends of mine like Joe Cirincione and Jeffrey Lewis and others that have been saying, hey, we can go overboard. And I've always seen this interesting dance over the decades between those who worry about having too many tools in our our arsenal, and wanting arms control and restrictions, and then those that are trying to figure out every dimension of warfighting to protect this continent and nation against bad players in the world. And I've always been interested in whether that chemistry is where it should be. And I know you talk to all sides of it. Is the strategic defense of the country on all sides of the debate in a healthy place right now? Or do you think we need to all open our eyes again and reacquaint ourselves with what strategic defense means? Well,
Steve, a healthy debate is what keeps us strong. And we need our miraculous defense labs like you have in New Mexico with Sandia and Los Alamos, and that we have in Tennessee with Oak Ridge, and there are others. And we need the groups like Plowshares and others, Union of Concerned Scientists, who help keep the debate honest, because no side has a monopoly on the truth. And it's the debate that keeps us focused. Now, been a little worried, and the Pentagon has seen this. A lot of the Cold War stuff got a little bit old and outmoded, and keeping the morale up with the truth so it's hard, because if you're guarding a missile field in North Dakota, you kind of wonder, well, how important is this, especially when it's really cold outside. But I think we're seeing a new focus on these important issues, especially as China, a rising power, creates really a double threat against us, not only Russia, but also China. We've got to be prepared, because these countries are spending tens of billions of dollars to do everything they can to unsettle us, if not harm us. And we have to be ready, because it's not a Boy Scout, Girl Scout world out there. We have to be prepared, and that's the job of the Defense Department.
Well, Representative Jim Cooper, who is chairman of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, thank you so much for joining us today and for your candor on these really important issues.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
I'm pleased to welcome my next guest, Vice Admiral John Hill. He's the 11th Director of the Missile Defense Agency, where he oversees its mission of defending the United States and its allies from ballistic missile attacks in all phases of flight. Vice Admiral Hill, it's great to be with you today. This is a topic that fascinates me because there's so many dimensions. I remember, I'm one of the people that remembers the Cold War. I remember the Soviet Union. I remember the over-the-horizon, questions. But I don't know where we are today as we look at both threats and our own capabilities. Can you just give our audience a quick sketch of what you're overseeing and what we need to defend ourselves against?
Sure, Steve. Thanks. I also remember the Cold War very well. I kind of went into the Navy in the mid-'80s, and we spent all of our time there. If you look how the Missile Defense Agency has evolved over the years, since that time when there was a Strategic Defense Initiative and then a Ballistic Missile Defense Organization and now a Missile Defense Agency, from a ballistic missile perspective, particularly defense of the homeland, the threats are the rogue threats that we're focused on today, and that is North Korea and Iran. So if you look at the architecture that we have in place to defend the homeland, it is focused against those threats. Now, when you move out of that homeland defense mission and go into the regional mission where we are forward, protecting our friends and allies and our forward deployed forces, that's a little bit of a different game. Those regional threats come from a multiple set of adversaries, and so we have to be ready and prepared to handle those with a sensor architecture that works depending on the region that you're in, with the fire control and networking capability, and then the appropriate weapons to take on a range of threats, from cruise missiles to hypersonic missiles to some of the shorter range ballistic missiles that might be targeting our forces forward.
Now, Admiral Hill, I know that we are always advancing in technology, always trying to fill in the holes and deficits that we have there. I've been reading about this next generation interceptor, which I know is some years out. What are our needs as you look forward that we need to fill in gaps with potential adversaries from places like North Korea and Iran? It's interesting talking about them because these are not very rich states, but they are powerful potential adversaries.
Right. If you go back to the history and look at when ballistic missiles were first used, they were really a terror weapon when you think about it. There wasn't precision guidance on the front end of those missiles. They were basically lobbed. They used the force of gravity. They go up into space and they come down. It's like throwing a football. What we're facing now, though, is precision guidance, high speeds, once they're back into the atmosphere, maneuver capability. But more importantly, when we engage, we're engaging not just a unitary or a singular warhead. They come equipped with decoys, or what we'll call countermeasures, jamming devices, and other things to challenge not only the sensor network, but the seekers of the weapons that we use. So that's the world that we're in today, is an evolution of ballistic missiles that now leads to more maneuver, higher speeds, often dim propellant, so that they can't be seen from some of our space assets. And so we're going to have to go to space. And we have a plan in which to do that, to fully leverage space capability. We have space capability today that we're using. We'll continue to build out land-based radars and continue to increase the radar capability that is on our ballistic missile and integrated air and missile defense ships today. So it's a much more formidable threat in the future, so we have to build against that. Now, specifically for the next generation interceptor, that's exactly what it's going after, is an evolved threat from the rogue nations that includes countermeasures, it includes decoys, it includes jammers and those sorts of things. We could find ourselves with nuclear payloads. And so looking at all of that, that's the requirement space for the next generation interceptor, which will eventually, backfill and build out our capacity for the ground-based mid-course defense system, or GMD.
Well, look, we're right after a NATO leaders summit. President Biden was over there. I went over to Europe as part of that for a security forum in GlobeSec in Eastern Europe. And so Russia was a big part of the discussion. China was too. And I remember, a couple years back, Vladimir Putin doing a promo video for some kind of hypersonic, next generation, scare us all kind of, missile. And so I don't know how much is hype and how much is real. But when it comes to that upper end threat, are we prepared for that? And do we have something like that in our toolkit?
Well, so there's a number of ways to deal with threats, right? We'll always say diplomacy first, so it becomes a policy question. Then it comes down to the offensive capabilities that we may or may not employ, depending on what that situation is. But you want to have credible defenses for the forward deployed forces. And so when you look at the kind of threats that you just described, what I'll call a boost hypersonic, or, it could be a cruise missile, hypersonic missile, it could be air launched. You have to have the capability to go against those. Today, within the Navy's sea base, we have a terminal capability that is deployed now that we're continuing to improve and deploy out to the fleet. What we want to do, though, is to engage further back. So when I say layered defense, that would be a layered defense approach to hypersonic missiles, to engage in the glide phase, which is when they're along the atmosphere, and then deal with them again when they come down into the terminal phase.
Admiral, let me ask you, this is kind of a James Bond-like question, but we might as well have some fun. I think that the kind of threats we've been talking about, even with the North Korea, we're talking about state-based threats. A lot of our security establishment for the last nearly 2 decades has been focused on non-state actors, on terror actors. Is there a point in the future where you worry about, and you've got to begin planning and thinking about, some of the technologies we're talking about, some of the capacity, moving from state control to non-state control? We've talked about Russia and Ukraine and how hybrid warfare is one of the new dimensions of conflict. So is it a mistake just to look at state-based systems? Do we have our antenna up for other kinds of morphing in this area that we should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. We do. It's something that, if you ask me what keeps me up at night, it is those unpredictable threats that may not necessarily be addressed through a hard kill, weapons defense system. And so we have to make sure that we're cyber resilient. When I talk about the fire control and networking that we have deployed globally, that is a large system. And so it must be hardened. It must be protected. So we spend a lot of time and energy there to make sure that the data that comes down, from our sensors into an engaging platform, that's resilient and can fight through. Because it's a very dirty environment coming in the future. And so we do have to plan and deal with that.
And then just finally, Admiral, one of the other areas I've talked to previous secretaries of defense about is the growing terrain and ecosystem around the Arctic. A very important area, particularly with climate change sort of changing that area up there. We've had a lot of, missile defense capability protecting North America based up in that area. and you just talked about space. How important or unimportant are placements like, the Arctic in the Northern Hemisphere, up there? Or are we getting to a place where geography, we can solve it through space? We are not geographic dependent anymore.
Yeah, I think one of the great values of space when I speak to sensor architectures, what that really means. If you have a radar sitting on land and a threat flies through that to give us tracking information, but they figure out a way to not fly through it, right? Then how are you going to see them? Right, so it really comes from looking down from space onto Earth. And that's how we handle the global maneuver problem. Because if you don't have a sensor, tracking from launch all the way through demise, there's a period of uncertainty in that track. And what we don't want to do is launch a weapon that then opens its seeker and there's nothing there because the target has maneuvered. So space really is that answer, and it does close the gap from having a geographical sense of where the threats are coming from and where they may be traveling. Being able to look down from space and have a global view becomes critically important, and that's recognized, not just within the Missile Defense Agency, but within the services as the future area for investment, and we're moving smartly in that direction.
I'll sneak in one more. Do you have the resources you need, or do you need more?
Well, like everybody, that's the question that was asked, during budget rollout and in some of our recent hearings. There's never enough money to do everything you want to do. So at the end of the day, you do have to prioritize. And I believe within President Budget 22, our request there, really does show the priorities of where we think we need to go. And Congress directs that we also publish an unfunded requirements list, which we have provided to Congress. And, just kind of to summarize what we have in that list is where we had to take risk. It's a reflection of that. So if I can't have money for everything, then I'll have to prioritize. And the way we handled it this time is we kind of backed away from some of the production numbers that we would have for some of the missiles that are used in the regional fight. So we'll continue to build out the capacity best as we can, but I want to make sure that we're putting the budget behind the space capability, the budget behind the next generation interceptor, and then getting to the hypersonic missile defense glide phase interceptor, because that really is a capability that's needed today because that threat exists today.
Well, Vice Admiral John Hill, Director of the Missile Defense Agency, I really want to thank you for enlightening us on this. This is not an everyday topic we have, and it's great that you were willing to give us a bit of a deep dive on this subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me, and thank you for your support to missile defense.
And now for a message from our sponsor. Please welcome Tay Fitzgerald, Vice President of Strategic Missile Defense at Raytheon Missiles and Defense.
Missile defense is referred to as stellar team, noble mission, and Raytheon Missiles and Defense is proud to be a part of the collective team across government, military, industry, and allied nations. The technology we've built in partnership with the Department of Defense is deployed around the world today, protecting the U.S. and its allies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But the landscape is changing. We're seeing both a proliferation and an advancement in the types of threats we face, and our missile defenses must evolve with it. Fiscal year 22 is the first MDA budget the new administration has put out, and we've seen continued support from Congress. In an increasingly complex threat environment, the U.S. must find a balance between homeland defense and regional defense, between improving our terrestrial sensor network and migrating more assets into space. We also must find a balance and a way to tailor against advanced threat and fielding sufficient quantities to meet today's basic threats in the numbers that we see. This requires a strategy that's both revolutionary and evolutionary in its approach, in both starting new development programs while continuing to enhance fielded systems. The future of missile defense will rely on our ability to jointly invest in research and development and testing. We need to be comfortable fielding incremental capability and to learn quickly from the data and experience to improve them. It's also time to apply technologies like digital engineering, AI, and machine learning to continually improve our systems. Partnerships, not just across government and industry, will be key, but also with our allies around the world. Future threats know no boundaries, and we know we're stronger when we defend together. By jointly investing in future capabilities with our allied partners, we'll have more timely, more innovative, and more economical solutions. The reality is that this stellar team across industry, government, and military are committed to both the defense of our regional allies and our homeland. We're focused on birth-to-death tracking across land, sea, and space, and to ensure we can contain and defeat any threat. We're prepared to field sufficient numbers to our COCOMs today to ensure protection, while building the systems of tomorrow to defeat the threats that are on the near horizon. It's a noble mission we support today, and noble and groundbreaking mission that we face tomorrow.
I'm now joined by General Lori Robinson, who's retired from military service after a 37-year career. She served as commander of U.S. Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command. I call it NORAD. I don't know what all of you call it. And is the first woman in U.S. history to lead a combatant command. General Robinson, it's really a huge pleasure to meet you, and thanks for joining us today. You know, I could start out asking you about UAPs or UFOs or about that Matthew Broderick, Ali Sheedy movie and NORAD. But let's start off, I think a lot of Americans, look at NORAD, look at the role you played as something that's sort of exotic. They don't have an everyday feel for the topic we're discussing today. And I'd just like to start out and say, what kept you up at night when you were running this command?
I have to, first of all, Steve, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm truly humbled to be here to talk about this topic. It's incredibly important, as you have articulated. Secondly, I am old enough to remember the Cold War. What kept me up at night? Two things. First of all is Kim Jong-un as the commander of Northern Command. And if you look at my time as the commander out there, 21 missile shots, and in 2017 alone, 16 missile shots. As the commander of NORAD, responsible for defending the airspace over Canada and the United States, was watching Russia and their cruise missile capability build during my time there. So those were the two big things that I sat back and thought about and kept me up at night.
I remember, as I was mentioning earlier in my conversations about spending some time at Sandia and Los Alamos National Labs, and there were people there that were part of the Reagan-era Strategic Defense Initiative when we were beginning to think about lasers and space-based systems. And you just had a sense that at that time we went through a strategic leap in terms of what's capable. We're talking today about next-generation interceptors and begin to change our infrastructure around a bit when it comes to layered missile defense. In your experience, have we made those strategic leaps yet? Do we have something we need to jump into? Or are we moving incrementally? And I guess, are there trade-offs in security between those two approaches?
Yeah, so Steve, the first thing that I would say is we've watched North Korea roll out new capabilities, right? Even just this fall, we watched them bring on a new capability. What's important is to understand that capability and then think about the capacity. As I listen to Admiral Hill talk about the way that they're looking at things, I think that it is a good leap, and they've taken very hard look at what the capability is and what do we need to have to sufficiently defend the homeland. So I'm impressed. Admiral Hill, I think, spoke to it very, very well with where we've been, but more importantly, looking to the future and where we're going.
General, one of the privileges I've had in my life is I spent a lot of time in the past with General Brent Scowcroft, the National Security Advisor to President Bush and also President Ford, but also Zbigniew Brzezinski. And one time we had an evening where we were talking about the environment you used to command, which is really looking at space, sort of missile threats that face the United States, and how close we've come at various occasions to disaster by either misreading something or accidents or then the Soviets, when the Soviets were still around, of doing this. And I guess my question is, do you have, I don't know how to phrase this, confidence is the wrong word, but do you think we are susceptible to making bad decisions in the heat of a crisis? Or do you think we've got enough layers there that we can filter through that arena of threats so that we can make smart national security decisions, with missiles?
Yeah, Steve, so I would tell you in my experience, if I go back to my 16 shots in the month of, in the year of 2017, I would tell you a couple things were so incredibly important and gave me confidence in our ability to defend and that we had the right guidance. We had clear, unambiguous guidance, but what's important also is that we trained an awful lot to make sure that if we came to a crisis, that we knew what was going to happen and we knew where we were going. So I would tell you, I know those things continue, and those things should give all of us solace, the capability to defend and the training to do so, and the clear, unambiguous guidance.
Are we keeping up technologically? I've just come back from an Eastern European forum where we discussed artificial intelligence and 5G and big data and quantum computing. And I would say the consensus in the room was America was in the game, but China and Russia and other states are in it in a big way, and we're not leading on everything. And I'm just wondering, when it comes to all the dimensions, of these multi-factor, weapon systems like next generation interceptors and others, do we have everything we need to actually stay technologically ahead of our rivals?
So, Steve, obviously I'm not in the game every day.
Right.
But
retired. You have your gut, right? You have your gut about where we're going.
So I was going to say, this is America, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and if you think about the ingenuity and the way that all of our services think and all of industry thinks about these things, watching what's going on, my instinct tells me and my gut tells me that absolutely we're thinking not just about today, but the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And it's in our DNA to make sure that we keep pace ahead of everybody out there that we would consider a threat to the homeland.
I want to weave in some questions from our audience into my question because they're better than mine. But Alex Thiessen from Senator Ted Cruz's office asks, how vulnerable are missile defense systems to cyber attacks? Good question. We see so many else systems out there, U.S. government systems vulnerable. How vulnerable are our military and defense systems?
Yeah, so Steve, I would tell you this. I know that it is something that gets tested a lot. I know that it's something that people are concerned about. And I know writ large, the Department of Defense is very concerned and works very hard in defensive capabilities to protect the networks.
You were also, as I mentioned, the first woman in a combatant command. And I don't want to be unfair in this, but I guess my question to you, because you are a leader and I've been privileged to talk to so many other great women leaders across the field, but one of the questions is, how do we make that a non-issue by having so many women in combatant commands that it becomes trivial? And so do you feel like we're beginning to tilt that direction? Do you think the military and the Pentagon have a lot to learn yet in terms of opening up their aperture on leadership?
So how lucky are we? We've got General Jackie Van Ovost and Lieutenant General Laura Richardson having their confirmation hearings this summer. It says to me, as the Vice President has said, and I've said, I might have been the first, but we can already see that I'm not the last. And so I think that, we continue to learn lessons and we continue to move forward, but we have two shining examples. If confirmed, they will be great leaders in their own right.
Let me just ask you finally, General, I really enjoyed this. You're welcome back anytime. We could talk all day. This has always been a big interest of mine. But I get you probably participated in countless numbers of simulations, with the nation you just talked about, North Korea. I'm sure also Iran. And so, not to convey anything that the public should know, but when you kind of look at those simulations, how do we come out in terms of some of these accidents? From your perspective, and I know that you're not tuned into the latest, but when it comes to layered security and defenses, are we in pretty good shape? Do we need to be on the alert for the fact that, North Korea and Iran are not static threats and they're continuing to move things forward? I want to give our audience a feel for that balance between security and fragility as you think about the simulations you've been through, because I know you've been through them.
So I would say it this way. Yes, we had simulations. It's training, right? I mean, and we put ourselves in very difficult positions sometimes, right? So that you can learn from them. But I need to make sure our audience understands. And I testified to this, and I know that the current commander has testified to this too. I was very comfortable and confident in our ability to defend the homeland. And I think that that's what's really important. And I think what's as important is making sure that we understand both North Korea and Iran's capability and their work on capacity and their intent. And if you look at all of that, again, I will start at the very beginning. I'm very comfortable and confident during my time, and as I listen to the current commander testify, in our ability to defend the United States.
Are you still in Colorado, or did you move somewhere else?
No, I am in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Wow, well, good for you. I just happen to love and visit frequently. I've never been into NORAD, but I've looked at it a lot from outside because I love that area of the world that you were in. But I'm glad you're safe in St. Petersburg.
I would never speak for the current commander, but I'm sure he would love to show you around.
Okay, great.
And I'll drop him a note and tell him I told you so.
Excellent. Well, General Lori Robinson, Foreign Commander of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, U.S. Northern Command, NORAD. What an honor. I really appreciate you sharing your candid thoughts today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen. Have a great rest of your day.
My final guest is Congressman Mike Turner from Ohio. I should say that he and I may very well be relatives from Bethet County, Kentucky, from cousins, but that's an entirely different subject. He's the ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Congressman Turner, it's great to see you again. Thanks. We'll keep the cousins part quiet. But let me just ask you, Mike, when it comes to this issue of are we putting in place the security and defenses that we need right now, how vulnerable do you see the United States and our allies to intercontinental ballistic missiles and other forms of missiles, hypersonic and other? What do we not have in place that we need to put in place from your view? You're on mute, Mike. Congressman. Hello, folks. So I guess somebody has to turn on Congressman Turner's audio.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
There you go.
1, 2, 3, testing.
Thank you, Mike. You're here.
Testing.
Great.
Okay, great.
Well, good to see you, cousin.
Sent me over to you. I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Steve, what I was going to say is one of the things that we have to look to when we take up the question of do we have enough or are we adequately protected is really how far we've come in the policy debate. If you'll recall at the end of the Bush administration, where the Bush administration had planned a forward deployment of a ground-based system in Poland and a radar in the Czech Republic. The Obama administration came in and canceled that, announced the phase-adapted approach, which resulted in Aegis Ashore being placed in Romania and now in Poland. The defense of the U.S. homeland was scrapped in that overall plan. At that time, as we went from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, the debate on missile defense was still, the three prongs of it was not going to work, it was provocative, and it was too expensive. Those three things were an impediment, really, to some of the advances that we needed in missile defense to be able to make our systems more effective and to expand our overall capabilities. At the same time that debate was going on, the United States entered into an agreement with Israel to help co-develop the Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow, that is their really multi-layered system of defense. Mm-hmm. And what occurred in Israel as a result of the fact that they're in such a constant state of conflict is that we got to see missile defense deployed and work. And that really changed the policy debate because we saw not only is it not provocative, it's de-escalatory. It gave Israel the space to be able to make decisions to later respond as opposed to immediate response when they would have been under fire. It was not too expensive because the amount of damage that was prevented was overwhelming in comparison to the cost of missile defense. And also it worked, and it worked overwhelmingly. So the policy shift has occurred from it doesn't work, it's provocative, it costs too much, to almost a sense of it's immoral for us not to vigorously pursue missile defense because we're leaving populations, infrastructure vulnerable to the missile threat. And the missile threat has been proliferating, both in like North Korea and Iran, who are pursuing ICBM or missile technology, but also in other nations and the numbers of missiles that put the United States at risk. So we're not keeping up. We have a lot more to do, and I think it's going to, pull us into the new technology ultimately, which hopefully will be directed energy.
So let me ask you, in the world of kind of nuclear weapons and strategic logic, one of the big elements of that used to be it was sort of the Dr. Strangelove idea of mutual assured destruction. Does this now take us out of the mutual assured destruction box? And is this one of the reasons why the Russians and Chinese are so worried about about our investments in missile defense, because then from their viewpoint, it looks like it gives America a unique form of first strike capability and a unique form of defense that combined looks very threatening to them. So I guess we used to have MAD, and people said, oh, you have stability from MAD. I'm just wondering if we're evolving out of that.
No, and really, those who advance that argument really are being disingenuous, because the numbers of what we have invested in missile defense are easily overwhelmed by either of those nations and pose no real threat to the issue of deterrence. So we are seeing massive buildups from both those nations, and not in response to missile defense, but in ways in which they're even deploying exotics where Russia is developing nuclear weapon systems that are even specifically tailored to the types of targets that they may look to, that are very troubling. And of course, China now looking to implement a triad, where before they did not have full build out of a nuclear weapons capability. But what we're seeing, though, is even, for example, Russia has a missile defense system that protects Moscow. It's very well known. We do not have similarly deployed for Washington, D.C. And so then it begs the question of, well, if Moscow is protecting itself, why aren't we not protecting the citizens and certainly the seat of our national capital? And that's how the future debate goes. At this point, we're no threat to any of our adversaries in tipping that scale on deterrence. But we do need to be looking to what types of technologies, what type of investments do we have to make so in the future we lessen the threat to both our nation and our populations.
Mike, one of the things we've been discussing today are next generation interceptors, which I understand is the next step forward in missile defense that would replace a lot of our northern, focused over the horizon ground-based missile defense systems. Do you support that? Where are we in terms of funding it? Is there a security gap between the time now and when that's deployed?
Well, there certainly is a concern. The Missile Defense Agency stumbled. They were redesigning the kill vehicle that would go into the missiles that we currently have in Alaska and California that are largely focused on the issue of the threat of North Korea. We have on the books, approved by Congress, an East Coast missile defense site that would go at Fort Drum that would be an expansion depending upon how the threat from Iran evolves. This is essential because the new kill vehicle, which is now being redesigned again, would be both more accurate, more reliable, and also be able to respond to some of the things that we see that are progressing in our adversaries' technology. The aspect of this, I think that's most important, is a recognition that missile defense is important, it works, and we need to make certain that we continue that investment to protect our country.
Mike, how organized are we in terms of looking at the security dimensions of space right now? I know there are a lot of commercial players moving into space. I see Elon Musk every day on Twitter doing something with regards to SpaceX, and Richard Branson. But that may not fit the kind of definition of how we're going to both protect ourselves in space, but also look at space as a new arena where security is obviously part of that. How much is that space dimension becoming part of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee work you're doing?
Well, it's absolutely essential. I mean, first off, it's the integral foundation to almost every operation or aspects of operating for our military service branches. In addition, it is the way we see, it is the way we assess the threat. And certainly for missile defense, it is both our understanding of if we are at risk, if someone is attacking us, but also then how do we approach trying to neutralize that target. We're working diligently to both strengthen our space assets, respond to what our adversaries are doing. It's been widely publicized that Russia and China have both tested systems that would attack satellites and would destroy them. We need to make certain that we can sustain our space capabilities. That, of course, was the impetus for the birth of Space Force, the new service branch. And General Raymond's doing an excellent job of doing a real quick and dirty assessment of what do we need to do right now and what do we need to do for the future.
Let me ask you one. I've got two more questions for you, Congressman. But I love this conversation. I love that we get to talk about this now, and instead of other stuff as we have in the past. But I think that one of the things that intrigues me is the question of arms control. Remember, Ronald Reagan negotiated big arms control deals, and really, the circumstances that led to what led to the demise in a way of the Soviet Union. But when you kind of look at arms control and the players we have out there now with Vladimir Putin in Russia, Xi Jinping in China as big players in this, but there are others, of course, is there still a place for negotiated arms control in these areas of strategic defense and strategic offensive systems? Do you believe in that, or is that folly at this moment, given some of the challenges we're facing?
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that have happened that certainly make it more difficult. One, the obvious violations that we have of treaties by Russia. The INF treaty died as a result of the fact that Russia was violating the treaty, all the way up to deploying a non-compliant missile system. Secondly, you have the rise of China and the fact that they are vastly expanding their capabilities and are not subject to any arms control agreement, nor have they indicated an interest in doing so. And thirdly, you've got Russia deploying these exotics, Skyfall, this nuclear-powered missile that can orbit the Earth, Poseidon, that is basically an unmanned submarine that pops up out on the coast and then attacks a city, and then others, some of which are of course classified as we're reviewing what Russia's intent is. We're seeing that they're continuing to invest in developing new weapons. All of those things make negotiations more difficult. But what's happening on Capitol Hill, which I think is incredibly important, is that there's a doubling down of people understanding that we need to modernize our nuclear weapons and our nuclear weapons production systems. Because no one is going to enter into an arms control agreement with us if we do not even have the ability to produce nuclear weapons. We don't have the ability to modernize and field nuclear weapons. They will just allow us to continue down our path of decline and decay. That, I think, is taking hold here among all of those who are, who want to see a decline in the dependence on nuclear weapons. Understand that we still need the infrastructure, we still need the capabilities, or no one's going to think that we're important enough even to negotiate with.
Let me just ask you finally, Mike, one of the things that I think I'm going to get a lot of emails and tweets right now from friends of mine who say I've got it all wrong. But I've spent a lot of time looking at the defense budget in the past. And, some of the systems we're talking about are very expensive pieces of it, but they pale in comparison to the costs of maintaining a large human military force, the benefits that go with that, the long-term benefits we give for people who are willing to put themselves on the line to sacrifice for this country, but many people who are in the reserve who've joined. That infrastructure of human costs, in a way, crowds out what's there to invest in R&D, in next-generation weapon systems that may be less people-dependent. Is there any serious talk going on in national security circles up on the Hill about how to get those in balance? Because if you look at where the real pressures are, they're not, in my view, they're not just coming from next generation nuclear weapons. It's coming from a lot of other ongoing obligations which the Pentagon is going to have for generations after today.
Steve, well, you are absolutely right. And what we don't want to do is cannibalize our capabilities to modernize or cannibalize our conventional capabilities. What we've gone through with Iraq and Afghanistan, a period of time where modernization was put on hold. Then we had sequestration, where even our general readiness of our conventional forces was at risk. During those two periods, our adversaries, main adversaries, China and Russia, spent a significant amount of time designing modernization programs and putting them into place so that now we see our adversaries almost jumping ahead in front of us in a number of ways. So if we just return back to the modernization path that we were on, we're going to modernize into second and third place. So we have to leapfrog. We have to look at new technologies, new capabilities. And you are absolutely right. That means that's going to take additional resources. Now, as we know, our nuclear weapons and those are, in our adversaries' hands have done their job, as many will say, every day, and that they've kept the peace, because there is that, as you've described before, the deterrence of holding everyone at bay so we don't have major power conflict. But the other aspect of this that's important is that as we look to the future, as we look to the rogue states, that's where missile defense comes into a real important area. It's not just the deterrence factor, but it's also how can we make certain that they're not capable enough to be able to hurt America and hurt our country.
Well, Congressman Mike Turner, ranking member of the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, really knowledgeable on this. One of the most, I don't want to get you in trouble, but in my book, one of the most bipartisan people out there. We've talked about your district before, and we still have that Kentucky connection we have to sort out. But
that's right.
Yeah, Mike Turner, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
That brings us to the end of our program. A really big thank you to Raytheon Missiles and Defense for its support, and to all of you attendees for joining us for these set of discussions. For any of you who have missed these conversations, we'll have the video from the event up on our website shortly. I'm Steve Clemens. Be well.